My name is Paola Suarez, and I'll be moderating tonight in between the two speakers. I hope that we are recording already, right? So this is on. Perfect. So a little bit of introduction into the series for the ones that are joining today and were not there in the first one. So the idea of a Beyond the Status Quo is about exploring how we can create workspaces that are more meaningful to a diverse crowd of people, so that everybody can feel that they can bring their whole selves to the office and work. We aim to be a starting point to trigger these discussions and try to bring various viewpoints and perspectives through our speakers. So my name again is Paola Suarez. I'm a software developer and I used to be a neuroscientist before. Now I work as a consultant in Thoughtworks, Germany. And I am here because I'm also part of the working group Black and People of Color Rising. I'll talk a little bit more about this later. In case you are wondering what is Thoughtworks or you're not really sure, briefly, I'm just going to say that we are a global software company, consulting company specialized in creating custom software with and for our clients. Currently, we are more than 7,000 people spread across 14 countries. So this brings internally kind of like a challenge and also rings a lot of bells and triggers us to put efforts into better understanding and deal with the various dimensions of diversity across the globe, because it is something that we experience every day. And also this gives us an opportunity to share our learnings around diversity and inclusion in the tech industry. And maybe, hopefully, we can all trigger a change within IT. So today, particularly, we're going to talk about the concept of race and its impact in our lives, and then an assessment of how diverse and inclusive our workspaces. Our speakers for the night are also thought workers, Christoph and Susan. And a little bit about them. Christoph is a UX consultant and lead for social and economic justice at Thoughtworks, Germany. And he has been working in the field of design since the early 2000s, and also has been really active in the struggle against racism and capitalist exploitation since the 90s. Susan is part of the race and ethnicity group in Thoughtworks Barcelona office. She's also a participant member in the organization Catarsia, which cares about anti-racism, feminism, and anti-capitalism topics through the lens of Asian descendants. So as some of you might notice already, within the different Thoughtworks regions, we have working groups or affinity groups. So this kind of like organization enables that the change can be driven also by the people working in each office. So for example, in Spain, there is the race and ethnicity group that Susan forms part. And in Germany, we also have the Black and People of Color Rising group. These groups normally are for people to support each other, to share experiences, resources, learn together, and focus on maintaining a safe space in which we can ask questions regarding the impact of different topics in our lives. In our particular case, in these two groups, is like sometimes we ask ourselves the impact of systemic racism in our lives, and so on and so forth. So now, after this long introduction, I am going to leave the stage to our speakers and superstars. And remember, everybody, that you can post your questions at any time that you want through the chat, and we'll come to them at the end of the talks. So, Chris?
Yes. Thank you very much, Paula. And this reminded me, I really need to update my introductory text, because since the 90s, this really is dating me. I feel old now. But yeah, thanks for reminding me of my age. All right, so I'm here today to talk about the invention of race. Yes, that's a meaty topic. So in the beginning of the year, we saw the rise of the biggest social unrest the US has ever experienced, right? So the George Floyd killing by police put the focus on anti-Black racism. And in Germany, we saw the largest Black Lives Matter protest outside of the US, actually. So forcing this majority white country and many companies in it to look deeper into their diversity and inclusion policies, uncovering blind spots around race. So in light of this newfound interest in the topic of anti-Black racism, the Green Party brought forward an initiative spearheaded by Aminata Touré to erase the mention of race from the German constitution. A discussion that is ongoing at the moment, but it looks like the initiative will be successful. So about this, Touré states, "We do not deny that the mothers and fathers of the Constitution had the right intentions to learn from German history to the persecution, the slavery, systematic murder, when they created the Article 3 as a protection against discrimination, but unfortunately they used racist language to do so. The language of the same race ideology that looked for arguments and reasons to kill human beings." She then further points out that the German word Rasse has a unique historical connotation, different from the English use of the word race. And I will agree and disagree with her on this point, because yes, there is a triggering sound to hear the word Rasse, because of the very central use of it in the Third Reich. But in the end, I think it's not different from how the word race was always used. In fact, Hitler wrote in Mein Kampf about how the US is using race to control minorities and the learnings that are to be gained from that. So it's not just about the language, it's race as a concept that we need to abolish if we actively want to fight racist discrimination. So nowadays, we know that race is a social construct. So, but what does that mean? In simple terms, it means that it was invented by people, not in a lab, but gradually over time. Or to reference Game of Thrones, it is a tale we tell ourselves over and over until we forget it's a lie. I would like to trace with you this process from ancient times to the current moment and explain why race isn't real, but racism certainly is. So obviously this is a very complex topic, getting more and more complex over the span of hundreds of years, different countries and continents. And I will point out some spotlights toward pivotal moments that can help us to understand how we got to the racialized oppression of today. Something that permeates through society into our private lives and workplaces. Also, I will have to simplify a lot. So if I mention a concept that you are familiar with, you might be able to catch me in my abbreviations. But let's get one thing out of the way. Let's start about biological racism. So skin color as a surrogate for race is a social concept, not a scientific one, as I said with the social construct comment. But this is John Craig Venter from the Human Genome Project, the folks who decoded human genetic information. So we finally have the last words from science on this one. There is no biological evidence that the human species can be divided into blocks that we now know as races. Any further insistence of a biological explanations are to be rejected as outdated and most likely made with racist intent by so-called race realists. But wait, you might say, isn't it obvious that I look different from you? That most people born in sub-Saharan Africa have dark skin, that most people in Asia have black hair, that most people in Europe are comparatively to the majority of humanity are pretty pale. And this is all true, and this has to do with biology. But we are talking along the lines of hereditary traits, not different from other traits like eye color or my need or to wear glasses that I inherited from my father and my mother. So we could ask ourselves, why do we not see fights between the race of the gray-eyed against the blue-eyed against the green-eyed? And this is where our dive into history begins. So for everybody who likes history, we came to the right place. So the difference between humans were always recognized and commented on. So for instance, the ancient Greeks called people from sub-Saharan Africa in ignorance about their different tribes and nations Ethiopians. They bound this name to the outward appearance that the poet Hesiod refers to as the dark-skinned man, and the philosopher Aristotle to those with dark skin. I mention this because I want to make clear that it's not that people of the past have been blind toward the obvious different appearances between humans from different parts of the earth. They attributed these differences to the climate and the terrain where they originated, but did not necessarily combine the appearance with inherent traits or positions in society. And this is not to say there was no xenophobia going on in ancient days. Oh, there certainly was, loads of it. In the end, for the Greeks, for instance, everybody who wasn't Greek was a barbarian and was to be looked down on. But you could transcend being a barbarian by adopting Greek culture, no matter your appearance. So if you want to find the origin of race, you have to talk about how different people ranked others for exploitation of a territory and or labor power. Because here we find the birthplace of race. The transatlantic slave trade plays a very important role in this, but race and slavery are not necessarily connected. In the days of antiquity, right, brutal wars between tribes and civilizations were common, as was the praxis of slavery, but it wasn't fully racialized yet. First references to skin color in conjunction of the degradation of people appeared throughout the biblical legend around the curse of Ham. So referring back to the son or one of the sons of Noah, who was for his transgressions against his father cursed to be servant of servants unto his brethren. The Bible did not make mention of the skin color of Ham. Still, Christians, Jews, and Muslims took this as justification to enslave Africans, adding to the myth that part of the curse of Ham was dark skin. Also, these dark people were still Ethiopians. We can see some proto-racism here. So for the beginning of the praxis of racialized dehumanization, then we experience today, so kind of this thing that we still have in modern times, we have to jump further around 1,000 years into the 16th century and the European colonial conquest. Also in the early days of the cruel time, the decision about the worth of human was mainly made around their religion. The first racist description of savage and primitive people appeared. I got one here, for instance, this one. They steal, they are cruel and bloody, full of revenge and delighting in deadly executions, licentious swearers and blasphemous, common ravishers of women and murderers of children. So that's pretty racist stuff that this English poet had to say about these folks. So subject for the first colonial efforts of the English in the midst of the 16th century, the Irish were, to put it mildly, not highly regarded by their oppressors, and were amongst the first workers when the British Empire expanded their colonial project to the other side of the Atlantic. And Cedric J. Robinson, professor for Black Studies and Political Studies and author of many books on the topic, remarks that racism, I maintain, was not simply a convention for ordering the relations of European to non-European people, but has its genesis in the internal relations of European people. So we have to look into Europe to find the origins of race. So the concept of these European races shifts regarding to power relations on the continent over the course of centuries. And we really start with academic justifications in the 17th century by people like Immanuel Kant, who established racial hierarchy in his works of anthropology in Germany. He places the white man on top and from then ranks down. And I will quote him now in his ranking. The white man, right? And then the yellow Indian do have a meager talent. The Negroes are far below them and at the lowest point are part of the American people. So this was the classical hierarchy agreed upon by all the big minds of Europe. So the Enlightenment shift the previous more religious arguments for racialized oppression into a more rational world of science and logic, creating white supremacy and parallel to the colonial project. This then really went into high gear in the 19th century when the British Empire was at its height of power. So this map you see here was created relatively late in the field of race theory by Madison Grant, a lawyer from the US. He was a writer and a zoologist, known primarily for his work as a eugenicist and conservationist, an advocate of scientific racism, and one of the leading thinkers and activists of the progressive era. So that's what counted for progressive back in the days. In this example, the races are called Nordics, Alpines, and Mediterraneans. So you don't need to remember any of this because that's nothing. It's just racist fan fiction. So the French writer Edouard Dumont in 1886 then created for the first time a scientific basis. I can't make so many scarecrow quotes here, for the differentiation of the Semites, and contributed the last big addition to the European races, the Aryan race, as a subcategory of the Caucasian race. And I mention this because these are two types of European racial categories that you have most likely already heard about, the Aryans and the Caucasians. And for anybody who has heard about the Caucasian and wondered why white people in the US are called that way in the census forms and so on, it's a remnant of this inner European racialization, a remnant of outdated race theory. So let's look a little bit deeper into the Caucasians. When the concept of Caucasians first appeared in the late 18th century, it was constructed mainly around bone structure, not by skin color. We can see this wide variety of people who would fit under the first draft of the Caucasian category. It's from Europe to India, and basically everybody in between on this side of the continent. Caucasian then was transformed to an umbrella term for the European races who settled in the US to differentiate from non-European folks. We got the Teutonics, for instance, that would be Germans, the Irish, Slavics, that would be then Polish or Russian people, and many, many more. But then we also got this one. White was originally a signifier for the ruling class, the British, the Anglo-Saxons, something that excluded even other Caucasians. This will give us a hint that whiteness was always a position of power, not a biological fact like skin color. Although over time, the other European ethnic groups would be able to transfer into whiteness by assimilation into the white supremacist power structures. Right, so if this is twisting your brain right now, I can relate, because we are now looking straight into the fraying mess of race ideology. But how did we jump from race definitions categorized through place of origin into a hierarchy of color? Immanuel Kant and others like him did not just pull this out of thin air. This again brings us back to the role of the Irish in times of settler colonialism. In the 16th century, a lot of Irish became indentured servants who bought their passage to America and the Caribbean, with harsh contracts binding themselves to the English for 5 to 10 years, depending on the contract. They would try to pay off their debt by doing unfree labor. So they were basically owned by the person holding the contract. And usually in these harsh times, they wouldn't live to see the end of their contract. But when over time conditions in the colonies improved and the demand for labor got higher, and eventually more and more Irish outlived their contracts because of improved living conditions, well, while African slaves were present from the beginning, the goal of the expansion, driven by the still young framework of mercantile capitalism, fueled the need for more and more of them. Europe got greedy. So this is when the transatlantic slave trade kicked into full gear, eventually ripping around 13 million Africans from their home and transferring their free lives into being property. Not mentioning all the millions who died on the passage, never made it to America or the Caribbeans. So as you can see, at a point, there was a strong argument made that the Irish and the Africans were closely linked, represented in this illustration that says that the Irish have been believed to be directly from Africa. Obviously, this happens in regards of the racial hierarchy being laid out, where the further your race is from the ones making those claims, the lesser your race is worth. The lesser your race was worth, the more justified others would be in your exploitation. This linking proved problematic with the growing class of long-lived Irish laborers and African slaves working side by side, two groups of people who saw a connection in their life of oppression, who would routinely band together, flee into the wilderness to connect with native tribes or rebel against the plantation owners. You might see where this is going. So by 1662, settler colonial society was structured in a way of relationship to ownership. Some people were free and allowed to own, others were bound to contracts of servitude, also others were considered property. So you can see that, for instance, in a law in Maryland, 1664, that was constructed against having offspring with slaves and also policing women's bodies. And this law talks about freeborn English women. Freeborn, being a part of the free owner class was the important thing. Freeborn English women. People were not enslaved because of their race. Instead, they were racialized because they were enslaved. Or with the words of the former, how the colors would look like, with the words of the former slave turned statesman, Frederick Douglass, it was not color but crime, not God but man, that afforded a true explanation of the existence of slavery. And I think now we're getting somewhere. This racialization strengthens the bond between the old owner class and the new working class, consisting of folks from Europe who transitioned from their status as serfs by creating a superficial bond of skin color. The rift between former serfs and current slaves was broadened. The freeborn English woman from Maryland law would soon be called a white woman. So I like this quote: "The purpose of racism is to control the behavior of white people, not black people. For black people, guns and tanks are sufficient." So I like this quote because it points towards why such a charade was even needed. If white working class people would empathize with black slaves and later the sharecroppers and working class blacks, this would threaten the supremacy of the rulers. So one of the founders of the field of sociology, Webb Du Bois, writes about this mechanism of control it must be remembered that the white group of laborers while they received a low wage, were compensated in part by a sort of public and psychological wage. They were given public deferences and titles of courtesy because they were white. So he describes for the first time a concept that will become known as white privilege. He further states that the newspapers specialized on news that flattered the poor whites and almost utterly ignored the Negro, except in crime and ridicule. And now we transition from slavery, where the difference of white and black was born, into a concept that we can still see around today. Doesn't this observation about the news sound very current? I think we can see that in our media landscape playing out to this day. So substituting race for racism transformed the act of the subject into the attributes of the object. So this is the historian Barbara J. Fields speaking here. And this is very important to recognize. This is why we can't view race separately from racism. So the act of exploitation of labor, reinvented since the years of slavery into various forms of discrimination, is hidden behind the concept of race. It makes race a problem that the people who have it have to deal with whatever it's subscribed to them. Black people are lazy. Black people are less intelligent. Black people are born with rhythm in their bloods. Black people are good at sports, and so on, so on. So as long as we do that, as long as we see people with different heritages as intrinsically other, we will always be conscious or unconscious biased. If we try to be anti-racist while still believing in the concept of race, the best thing Black people can hope for is tolerance or acceptance. But what we really want is justice and equality. Barbara J. Fields further explains that race is an ideology. Ideology is nothing that a society can inherit or something from the past, haunting the present. Ideology can only be current because it needs to be reaffirmed by action in a society to exist. So this means that we are all currently part of the reproduction process of racism. So coming to an end now. So what is the learning here? Race was created as a means of exploitation and can't be viewed separate from racism. This exploitation not only robbed Black people of their freedom, but also of their just reward for their labor. A robbery that is quite frankly ongoing today, with the Black pay gap, diminished job opportunities, the underrepresentation of Black people in leadership positions, and so on. Disadvantages that get increased if you talk about Black women. Susan will go into more detail about all of these things in her talk. And I think it's time to tackle racism, not through self-help circles around white fragility, but in a way that has meaningful impact on the lives of people who have been systematically marginalized over hundreds of years to build the civilizations that we are now living in. It is time that companies provide the material conditions for Black people to prosper. This is the only way to make sure that Black lives actually matter. All right, thank you for listening. I'm done.
Thank you, Christoph. Amazing talk. I'm going to start sharing my screen. Can you see it? Yes. So thank you everybody who is taking their time to be here, and also to the Thoughtworks Germany team to organize this event and also to invite me to participate. So my name is Susan. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a developer at Thoughtworks Spain. I'm originally from Peru and I'm a Tusan. If you don't know, Tusans are the Peruvian that are Chinese descendant. So I'm currently participating in Catarsia, that is an Asian descendant collective in Barcelona, that we are feminists, anti-racist, anti-capitalist, and anti-colonialist. So we try to focus our activism in education and using artivists, that is doing artivists with activists with art. So why artivists? So because one of our project is Forum Theater, or also known as the Theater of the Present. So how does it work? So this is not like a common theater play. We present a situations where it is happening an operation, and then we open a debate to reflect about what we saw, and even people from the audience can repeat the scene and again and show how they will act. So in Catarsia, we were creating a play that about situations of racism at the workplace. So it's the one that you see on the slide. And I wanted to mention this because it helped me to reflect together with my colleagues about this topic, and also it helped me to the creation of this talk. So I wanted to start talking about how races affect our lives. So we know that talk about races is a difficult and complex topic, and we must know that racism is not only verbal or direct aggressions. We live in a racist society where racism is shown in really subtle ways that we don't even realize because we have normalized it. So I wanted to start giving some examples that are not the usual ones, and this can help us to see different forms where racism appears in our lives. So the first example is that a lot of cities still have monuments to colonizer or slave traders. And why is this problematic? Because it is a representation of the power that colonialism still has nowadays, and to remind us this relation of power. For example, in Barcelona, we have a monument to Columbus, where at the bottom of the monument, we can see an indigenous kneeling in front of a colonizer and a priest. Another example is that everything is white Eurocentric. Art, education, history have this white Eurocentric as a reference, as a good, and don't consider or even invisibilize any other point of view that is not part of this hegemonic perspective. For example, in history, everything is narrated from the point of view of the whites. Same happened to movements like feminists, where white feminists only fight for their needs, forgetting totally about any other type of oppression or reality that other women have. Same for the climate change movement, that we only focus on white people as leaders of the movement, forgetting totally about how many indigenous activists and leaders are killed daily fighting and protecting their lands and the nature. The same repeats in how we understand how our beauty standards and what we understand as beauty nowadays. Another example is that we still celebrate racist traditions. In the photo, we can see one example that is a Christmas tradition in Spain, where they do blackface massively. And they even wanted the UNESCO to protect this tradition. So this is one example, but I'm sure that you could find more examples in your regions. So of course, this is also affect the workplace. Again, could be that this is not explicit, but these racist subtle aggressions could affect our confidence, our mental health, or even our performance at work. This can start at the first contact with the organization when, for example, recruitment team could discard candidates because of an unconscious bias. So a research proved that when African American and Asian candidates in the USA make their CV more white, they get more responses for interview. By making their CV more white, could be that they change their name to a more Occidental one, hide any clue of the race, or even mention more white hobbies. Also, this could happen when you go to an interview. That, for example, interviews don't even make the effort to pronounce your name correctly, make you questions or comment that maybe they will never ask to a white candidate, and have presumptions about your race, you for your race. For example, saying that because you are an Asian, you should be good at maths. Or they could be questioning your experience, and you have that feeling that you need to be double good to fit their expectations. So the same happened to the day-to-day at the office, and we should remember that it's a space that we spend most of our time. So we suffer coworkers' racist comments or jokes. You will probably find people questioning your skill, or even your salary could be different from another white worker that could do the same job as you. So what can we do as organizations? Try to make the interview process as fair as you can. An example could be doing bias training to everyone involved in this process. This can maybe help this process to be more fair and also improve the experience for people. Another option could be do blind recruitments where you hide photos, name, and nationality, and you only choose based on their experience. And also measuring the percentage of how many minorities apply and then how many minorities pass the process could help to identify if there is any big possible difference. So if you're looking for diversity, please do not fall into tokenism. So we understand as tokenism trying to hire a specific minority just to fill this racial quota. So I saw Arwa Magdawi TED Talk when she explained how she created this web page called rentaminority.com. And basically it's a service where you can hire whatever minority you want, an ethnical ambiguous, and a smiling Muslim woman, and even you can sign up as a minority. And yes, this web page is fake, but she was surprised how many people sign up as a minority and how many companies write her because they wanted to contract this service. And she concluded that this could happen because this is not so different from the reality and how people or companies perceive diversity at the workplace. So it is important to have that the organization have and allow this space to talk and raise awareness about this topic. So in Thoughtworks Spain, we have the race and ethnicity group where we try to send resources, raise awareness, and reflect together with our colleagues to topics that we have never been exposed to. And also, it's important to take care of the BIPOC workers' mental health. Also, having statistics for the salary gap between BIPOC workers and others that are doing the same job could help to identify if there is a big difference, and also it's important to normalize it the same way as gender salary gap. So please don't use our fight as a marketing campaign. Don't try to project this only on a marketing site, and then when someone joins your organization, this is far for the reality. So instead of this, please reflect on what are you doing as organization and take actions in order to improve. And what can we do as individuals? So for BIPOC, we know that suffer an aggression is not, of course, a nice situation, and that sometimes you are blocked or don't know how to respond, or even maybe you are sick of this. So don't blame yourself for not acting different. This reaction is total valid. Remember that it's not your responsibility to educate others, but feel free if you want to do it. Sometimes when you receive an aggression, you don't have this energy, or you could be not mentally well to explain others why what they did or they say was wrong. So we should remember that it's their responsibility to also reflect by their own. And it's important always to take care first of our mental health. So for white people, try not to respond with white fragility, justifying yourself or questioning the person that is pointing out your racism. As I said, don't expect BIPOC to educate you. You should make the effort to reflect and investigate. Internet is full of resources where you can learn. And please, do not force BIPOC to talk about racism. For you, this could be just a mental exercise, but for us, this could get more emotional and personal. And use your privilege. So if you're witness of a racist aggression, please use your privilege to point at that person, the racist, and invite them to reflect about what they did or say. If you remain silent, this could be being an accomplice. Also, use your privilege to amplify BIPOC voices, but don't speak for us. So I hope this helped you to reflect about how races affect our lives, even at work, and what can we do in order to change it. I know this is not an easy and nice process of deconstruction, and we need to learn, but especially unlearn a lot of things. So if you want to know more, there are some resources that you can check. I think we are going to share this in the chat. So thank you so much. Mm.
Thanks so much to Susan and Christoph for their amazing talks. It was really interesting to hear both stories. Yeah, we already have some questions popping in the chat, and also I think that there have been some answers going on here. But maybe we can start a little bit more. So one of the questions to Christoph at the beginning was from Jasmine. How does colorism, texturism, and futurism play into current racist power structures? I think that this was also already answered in the chat, but maybe it's interesting to pick it again, or just like having the discussion out loud.
Yeah, sure. So this is unfortunately a part that I had to cut for brevity from the talk, and I already had some slides planned out. So all of these concepts, right? I was focusing on the US, and in the US, Black people were in the minority. So there was always a lot of white folks around to control the Black people on the fields and so on. But in the Caribbean and in the Americas, you would have places where the Black slaves were in the majority, and you would have like a wealthy white minority of slaveholders who then would have to think about, oh shit, we're in a minority here. So what do we do? And obviously there was always mixing between the slaveholders and the slaves, to use a very euphemistic word here. And you then got people with lighter skin. And since we heard in the talk that skin color is a measurement of relation to ownership and rights, what do you do with people like me, for instance, who have a white father and a Black mother? And then you get into a very detailed list of different colorizations from, they would call me back in days a mulatto, and then it would go down octoroon and so on and so forth. And with all of these degradations of color, they would have different sets of rights. a mulatto would have different sets than a freeborn or a free black person at the time, and so on and so forth. It went so far that I think, I don't remember, it was one of the French colonies where there was a guy who was going for an officer's rank in the Navy, but somebody could look down his family tree and figure out that 100 years from where he was born, there was a black person in his line, so he wouldn't qualify for the officer's rank. So if you have a system like that, if you really divide, if you really look closely on the color of a person, how much is this person mixed and so on, and you attach this not only with an ideology, but also with the material value of how much can you own, are you able to vote, and what are the other rights? You create this whole system of colorism. And this is why I also identify as a black person. I am done with this mixed race, being biracial or whatever, because this then plays right into these racist categories, and I'm not part of this anymore. I recognize my privilege as a light-skinned black person in the hierarchy of colorism. Yes, I very much do that, because this is real and this exists. This always shows up when we have black people represented, and then you see, for instance, an actor playing that historical black person. This actor looks more like me and not like my mother, who or you can see that with Rosa Parks, for instance, who was a light-skinned black woman who was used as basically this face for the protest, because before her there were other black women who did the same bus protest like Rosa Parks did, but they were too black. So Rosa Parks was a light-skinned black person, so she became the face of that movement, and so on and so forth. So yeah, and I spoke a lot. So so I want to give some space to more questions.
Thanks. I think that I bet that for a lot of people, the discussion rings so many bells. Also for me, there was a question then for Chris too regarding the historic overview, which I also thought, and then it came up again in Susan's talk, which was really nice. It says, what about the historic Arabic colonialism and slavery in Africa? And maybe to add a little bit more to this question was like, also, what about like how did the concept of race evolve in like non-Western cultures, in a sense, if it did?
So yeah, like said in the chat, I did not touch on that type, because slavery basically is colorblind. As mentioned before, slavery is just a relation to property and labor motive. So everybody enslaved everybody back in the days. In European people enslaved other European people, African people enslaved other African people, and so on. So this wasn't really interesting for me when exploring the origin of race. So it's about race and not really about slavery, although the transatlantic slave trade is the main factor here. And I specifically called transatlantic slave trade out because all the other slave trades that were going on across the world did not really matter that much in regards of creating race. And racism in other cultures, I'm not that familiar with. I would assume that a lot of racism that exists in the world was transported in the colonial project. No country in the world was safe from the colonizers. In the high time of colonialism, they exported everything. I mean, if you look at the UN or anything like that, some do not, but most heads of states, they come in wearing suits. wearing English suits. If they are African head of state, Asian head of states, wherever they come from, they wear suits. And we as Europeans, we think like, yeah, that's normal. That's kind of formal attire that you should wear. But no, it's European attire. The formal clothes of high-ranking status is mostly lost in these countries, is replaced by whatever the West created there. You can see sometimes some African leaders and so on who still wear their traditional whatever the clothing is that their high-ranking people wear. But I think the suit is one of the examples of how pervasive colonialism was. And so, yeah, and I assume that in a lot of other countries outside of Europe that really mixed well with already existing xenophobia.
Thanks for the answer. Maybe we can also go to a couple of questions that are there for Susan. So from Emo to Susan, it says, do you have ideas about how can white-dominated climate activist groups best lend their voices for Indigenous and Black and people of color? Or how could these movements be more inclusive?
Okay, so I think that knowing that, acknowledge that there are other realities, also consider their opinion, what they have to share and say, and just use your privilege to amplify their voice, their voices. And I think, yep, this will be.
There's another question also from Emo that says, are there any concerns that data about race ostensibly collected to see any fight pay gaps could be abused for tokenism? Or would there be any suggestion on how to best collect this data?
Yeah, so I'm not an expert about collecting this data for salary, but I think this could be a good tool just to identify if we can see a big difference or a pattern of big difference. And yes, I saw a talk that I think it was in, I don't remember the country, that they are trying to have these metrics in order to see that this not happens in the companies. So, but I can I can research all this and I can send you more information if you want.
Thanks. I think that it's like a very important discussion and a thin line that also resembles a little bit like the quotas and the critique of quotas, right? That maybe like the percentages that we need to reach currently for diversity are so like high in a sense that like having them there is a good incentive, but then at some point maybe it would only be part that's just like mere tokenism or something, right? So it's good to bring it up. So we have more questions and maybe we go back to Chris. I'm trying to bounce between the two speakers. There's one that says many contemporary from Tim, and it says many contemporary race issues seem to be built on an incredibly simplified foundation, convenient for the people who benefit from this simplification. To what extent can we challenge this simplification, and how can we communicate complexity to an audience who are used to sound bites and slogans?
Well, simplification I assume here is kind of a form of stereotyping, because that's kind of like you have to stereotype Black people are like this, Asian people are like this, and so on and so forth. I think the most important thing is to remember that racism exists as a power structure. It's not about the people, it's always about in relation who has the power over whom. And in the white supremacy, this power structure is laid out for over hundreds of years, and we will not easily shake that. So this is integral to the concept of the society as integral as the exploitation of women is to the concept of this society. So it's not easily to shake. And how to engage and how to make this more nuanced, I think totally depends on how open your I don't want to say opponent, of how open the other person is who holds these beliefs. Because sometimes you might be able to have a conversation that is very differentiated around these issues of racism, and you might get somewhere. But other times this person will just block you and say like, no, white people, no, I'm a white person, Black people are like this. I know that because I know 2 Black people and they behave like this. So I don't think that I can give kind of a blanket answer to approach that.
Thanks again. So we have more questions. Here, there's another one from Ben. It says, thank you for the talks. They were really interesting and of course, well presented. I learned a lot. Chris, in what ways would you say that racism in Germany is distinct from racism in America, the United States?
Yeah, well, the base is the same as I mentioned, white supremacy, and the mechanism of racism is absolute the same thing. If it's in the UK, in the US, in Germany, Black people all over the world can tell you stories about people wanting to touch their hair and asking them where they're really from. It's quite fascinating. It's a story that we share around the globe. So sometimes I think there is kind of a white hive mind that kind of orchestrates this, because I thought this was a unique experience growing up as a Black person in Germany, but then hearing a person from Sacramento saying this, and then hearing a person from London saying this, I'm like, what is it with white hands in our hair? I think if we are moving away from just looking at it through the lens of anti-Black racism, I think the most unique differentiation here is that the racism in Germany right now is primarily focused against people with Muslim heritage. And I hear people say like, well, Muslim is not a religion, it's a religion, not a race. Remember, there is no race. And it doesn't matter to the racist if you are actually a practicing Muslim. You might be a secular Muslim, you might be a Christian from a primarily Muslim country, doesn't matter. Whatever the Islamophobic thing is in their head will apply to you. It might even apply to me. People might look at me with my lighter brown skin and think that I might be from Morocco or something like that, and would be Islamophobic against me. This is how the snake of racism works. It kind of wriggles around, it latches to all of these sides, because there's no rationale aside from the power structure from the top and down. So I think that's one of the main things. I mean, obviously the US is ripe with Islamophobia, but if you look into the racist discourse of Germany as of right now, what the AfD is doing, what Pegida is doing, and all the racist driving forces in our society in Germany currently, I think Islamophobia is the main type of racism that happens right now. So, sorry. There is a note, Islam is not a religion, but a way of life. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that one. Oh, I feel that there are so many, like the discussion can go on, and maybe the format is a little bit like unilateral discussion or something like that. But there are still some more questions. From Devin, also to Chris, it says, does racial identity have a place in a post-race, post-racism world? Can one both fight for abolishing the racist origins of race while still being proud of what the color of their skin means?
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there. So I heard from the story from one of the organizers in the 80s of the LGBTQ movement when it started around the AIDS crisis, and he said, I am gay until I don't need to be anymore. So I will be black until I don't need to be black anymore, because being proud of the color of my skin, how this came to be, the whole Black Power movement, after Africans were branded black, and we need to recognize there are no black people in Africa. You get black as soon as you, as a person with this color, transitioned into a white supremacist society. All of a sudden you will be viewed as black, because it is a social construct. And black people in the US, after gaining their freedom and fighting for their rights, they were confronted with the corner they were in, and they were like, fine, you put me in that corner, you say I'm black, you know what? I'm owning this. It's Black Power now. So basically into this reaction, I think if we at a certain time abolish racism and live in this utopia, there will be no need for being proud of your skin anymore. You can be proud of your ancestors, what your fathers and your forefathers achieved, your mothers, your grandmothers. You can be indulge in your culture, whatever that means: music, dances, food. It's this huge broad field that comes from being born into a different set of identities that are overlapping, and they are rich and they are beautiful, and you should celebrate all of that. But skin color as gender, as sexuality, I think they should need to go. And I realized they will not. So we will live with all of these concepts for maybe ever. We might redefine them. We might figure out how to work our way around that. But as long as these power structures are in place, like white supremacy, like patriarchy, like heteronormativity, and they have a use. As long as that, we will have these categories. And as long as we, as Black people, are fighting against white supremacy and racism, as long this is the struggle that we have, I think we can find energy in Black power. But it shouldn't be our goal. We shouldn't be just proud because we are Black. We should be proud because this means that we are fighting a fight by reasserting that our skin color, our Blackness has value, whereas we are put into a category that is meant to be without value. So as long as the struggle is there, yes, Black power, but we need to overcome this struggle. And I think understanding why race exists, why Blackness exists, can help us in getting there. But this is not the main fight. We need to abolish a lot more. As I said, it's about the material conditions. It's about fair pay. It's about getting the jobs. It's about being being in places of power, having truly diversity and inclusion all over the world in all positions of not only companies, but also governments. Yeah, I think that would be my answer.
That is a super answer. Also really inspiring, I'll say. Super insightful, and I hope that everybody can get a little bit more of reflection and discussion and trigger these conversations in their workplaces with their community. And yeah, like, I think it's up to us to keep learning, and thank you for our speakers to lend their time and to help us with like this path and educate us and also share their experiences. That's really valuable. I think that we are out of questions. So, oh no, sorry. I am missing one last one. From Devin to Susan, and anybody in general. It says, any tips on how to start a productive anti-racism conversation in the workplace? Would also love to hear more about forum theater, and it would be a very interesting tool to do bias training. Thanks for sharing.
Okay, so for starting this conversation at the workplace, so take in mind that if you want to start this conversation with people, make sure that they want to have this conversation and they are comfortable doing this. And if it's in the workplace in general, you can start like sharing resources or talking about news, and then start this conversation. And about the forum theater, yes, I think it's an amazing tool. Not only for the people that see and we can reflect together, but also for the ones that we are creating this play, because this is a long process. It's not only stay one day and create what are we going to do. So it's a long process where we share our experience, we debate, and then together we create what we want to show and the conflicts that we want to show to the audience, so we can reflect.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah, really important. I guess that basic communication tips, but sometimes they are not the normal or so. So we forget. So I think that now I went through the document of questions twice, and these were the last questions. I thank everybody for participating in the discussion, and also for your questions and listening, just like being open to grow a little bit more in this like kind of like challenge that we have to making our workplaces more inclusive and more diverse, and also kind of like changing the concepts that the world claims as the norm. All the resources will be on the website, or the resources that Susan and Chris and other people shared will be also available in the follow-up email and on the website. The recording is also going to be shared in a couple of days or weeks later. So in general, I think that that's all from us, and we are very grateful for your participation and time.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks to the speakers, and thanks, Paula, for the moderation. Before we all leave, we don't want to let you go with some food for thoughts, and we asked our speakers to share some questions where we can reflect on about what we've learned tonight. And the questions that we have is one from Susan. Can you think of any actions that your organization is doing in order to tackle this problem? Is there anything that you can do in order to help to improve or change it? And the question from Christoph is how to recognize that the concept of race is racist without being colorblind. If you now think this is a lot of text, we will also include that in the follow-up message. And yeah, if you want to start a conversation about that, you can always contact us. And yeah, I hope that supports your reflection. We will also include in our follow-up message, as Paula said, the sources from the two speakers. And if you enjoyed the event, we will have another one of this series Beyond the Status Quo on the 2nd of December with our colleagues Mikel and Dr. Jay Harrison. And we're actually also currently working on new events for the next year. So stay tuned, and you can always check our landing page. We will update it regularly with the upcoming events. If you can't wait for that, we actually have another event series. It's called Migration and Identity, Conversation Through Experiences. And there we will have another event on the 26th of November. This one is with an external speaker, and it will be in German, not in English. Their title is Was hat Rassismus mit mir und meiner Arbeit zu tun? If you're interested in that, check out our meetup page. And yeah, we're looking forward to see everyone at one of our next events. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.